The investigation into the stairwell incident began within hours of Prince Edward's return to his quarters. Commander Walsh found herself at the center of a complex web of competing interests and institutional pressures as senior palace officials, legal advisors, and security experts converged to examine what had transpired and determine the appropriate response. The first major briefing took place in the secure conference room adjacent to the Royal Protection Command Center. Present were Commander Walsh, Deputy Private Secretary Sir Robert Hartwell, the palace's Chief Legal Counsel Margaret Thornton, and Assistant Commissioner David Reynolds from the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Protection Command. The gravity of the situation was evident in the careful manner in which each official approached the discussion. Sir Robert Hartwell, a career palace administrator with 30 years of experience managing delicate situations, opened the meeting with a clear statement of the challenges they faced. We have an unprecedented situation that requires careful consideration of security protocols, royal prerogatives, and the potential for wider institutional damage. Our primary goals must be to ensure the safety and security of the royal family while maintaining the integrity of our protective procedures. Margaret Thornton, whose legal expertise had guided the palace through numerous crises, immediately focused on the procedural questions raised by Mitchell's actions. The central issue is whether Captain Mitchell's decision to place Prince Edward under protective custody falls within the scope of his authority as a protection officer. There are no clear precedents for such action against a senior member of the royal family. Assistant Commissioner Reynolds brought the perspective of operational policing to the discussion. From a security standpoint, Captain Mitchell appears to have acted within the general parameters of his training and responsibilities. Protection officers are authorized to use appropriate judgment to prevent security breaches, even when those breaches involve the individuals they are assigned to protect. Commander Walsh provided a detailed account of Mitchell's service record and professional reputation. Captain Mitchell has been one of our most reliable officers for over a decade. He has never shown poor judgment in previous situations, and his assessment of security risks has consistently proven accurate. His actions yesterday were consistent with his training and professional standards. The discussion continued for several hours as the officials examined every aspect of the incident from multiple perspectives. They reviewed the specific security protocols that governed movement through the palace, analyzed Prince Edward's behavior in the days leading up to the confrontation, and considered the broader implications of Mitchell's unprecedented action. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Prince Edward was conducting his own assessment of the situation with his private secretary and legal advisor. The prince had spent a sleepless night considering his options and the potential consequences of the previous day's events. His initial anger had given way to a more calculated approach as he began to understand the complex dynamics at play. The fundamental issue here is one of authority and respect, Prince Edward explained to his advisors. If protection officers can arbitrarily decide to restrict the movements of royal family members based on their personal assessments, then the entire foundation of our security arrangements becomes questionable. His legal advisor, James Morrison, raised important points about the precedent this incident might establish. Your Royal Highness, while the immediate situation is certainly problematic, we must also consider how this matter is resolved. The outcome will establish guidelines for future interactions between royal family members and their protection details. Prince Edward's private secretary, Amanda Foster, brought practical considerations to their discussion. Sir, we must also consider how this incident might be perceived publicly if details become known outside the palace. Given the recent media attention to your business affairs, any suggestion of erratic behavior could be damaging. These parallel discussions were taking place against the backdrop of normal palace operations, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable throughout the building. Staff members went about their duties with the careful attention of people who understood that they were witnessing a significant moment in the institution's history. By the afternoon of the second day, the formal investigation had expanded to include interviews with all personnel who had witnessed or been involved in the incident. Mitchell found himself in the unusual position of being both a key witness and the subject of the investigation, as officials sought to understand both his actions and the circumstances that had led to them. The interview with Mitchell took place in the same secure conference room where the senior officials had been meeting. Present were Commander Walsh, Sir Robert Hartwell, and Margaret Thornton, each of whom approached the session with professional seriousness and an understanding of the delicate nature of their inquiry. Captain Mitchell, we need you to walk us through your assessment of Prince Edward's behavior and the factors that influenced your decision to take such drastic action, Sir Robert began, his tone indicating that this was a fact-finding mission rather than a disciplinary hearing. Mitchell provided a comprehensive account of his observations over the previous weeks and the specific events of the incident day. He described Prince Edward's increasing agitation, his dismissal of normal security protocols, his use of unauthorized routes through the palace, and his apparent disregard for the safety considerations that govern protective procedures. My assessment was that Prince Edward was operating under extreme stress and was making decisions that could compromise both his personal safety and the security of the palace, Mitchell explained. His behavior was consistent with someone who was not thinking clearly about the potential consequences of his actions. Margaret Thornton focused on the legal and procedural aspects of Mitchell's decision. Captain Mitchell, when you decided to place Prince Edward under protective custody, what specific authority did you believe gave you the right to restrict the movements of a senior member of the royal family? This question went to the heart of the institutional dilemma created by the incident. Mitchell's response would help determine whether his actions were within the scope of his professional authority or represented an unacceptable overreach. I based my decision on the general authority granted to protection officers to prevent security breaches and protect the individuals in their care, Mitchell replied. My training and experience indicated that allowing Prince Edward to continue on his chosen course would create unacceptable risks. I believed I had both the authority and the responsibility to intervene. The interview continued for nearly 3 hours as officials explored every aspect of Mitchell's decision-making process. They examined his training background, his understanding of royal protocols, his assessment of the specific threats presented by Prince Edward's behavior, and his consideration of alternative courses of action. Commander Walsh's questions focused on operational procedures and Mitchell's adherence to established security protocols. Captain Mitchell, did you consider contacting senior officials before taking action against Prince Edward? Were there alternative approaches that might have achieved your security objectives without creating such a significant confrontation? Mitchell acknowledged that he had considered other options, but explained why he believed immediate action was necessary. The situation was developing rapidly, and Prince Edward's behavior suggested that he was not receptive to normal security guidance. I believed that allowing him to proceed would create a situation that would be much more difficult to manage and potentially dangerous. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the incident had created a precedent that would require new guidelines for handling similar situations in the future. The palace's legal and administrative staff began working on policy recommendations that would clarify the authority of protection officers and establish procedures for managing conflicts between security requirements and royal prerogatives. The resolution of the immediate crisis came through a series of carefully negotiated agreements between all parties involved. Prince Edward's meeting with the king was rescheduled under controlled conditions that satisfied security requirements while allowing the important family conversation to take place. Mitchell was temporarily reassigned to administrative duties while the investigation continued, but his career prospects remained intact pending the final outcome. The broader implications of the incident extended beyond the immediate participants to touch on fundamental questions about the relationship between the monarchy and those sworn to protect it. Palace officials recognized that the incident had exposed gaps in existing protocols and highlighted the need for clearer guidelines governing the authority of protection officers in unusual circumstances. 3 weeks after the stairwell confrontation, the investigation concluded with a comprehensive report that vindicated Mitchell's professional judgment while recommending changes to prevent similar situations in the future. The report acknowledged that Prince Edward had indeed been operating under extreme stress, and that his behavior had created legitimate security concerns that justified intervention. Prince Edward's response to the investigation's conclusions demonstrated his own growth and understanding of the complex dynamics at play. In a private meeting with Commander Walsh and senior palace officials, he acknowledged that his behavior had been problematic and expressed appreciation for the dedication of the protection staff. While I remain concerned about the precedent established by this incident, I recognize that Captain Mitchell acted based on his professional assessment of the situation, Prince Edward stated. His dedication to his duties, even in the face of significant personal and professional risk, reflects the highest standards of service to the Crown. Mitchell's reinstatement to active duty came with a commendation for his professional courage and judgment. The incident became a case study in royal protection training programs, illustrating the complex decisions that officers might face when balancing security requirements with respect for royal authority. The long-term impact of the stairwell incident extended far beyond the careers of the individuals directly involved. New protocols were established to provide clearer guidance for protection officers facing similar dilemmas, and regular training exercises began incorporating scenarios that tested officers' ability to handle conflicts between security requirements and royal preferences. 6 months after the incident, Prince Edward personally requested that Mitchell be restored to his protection detail, acknowledging that the captain's actions had been motivated by genuine concern for his safety and the security of the institution they both served. This gesture of reconciliation demonstrated the prince's understanding of the complex pressures faced by protection officers and his respect for their professional dedication. The stairwell incident ultimately strengthened the relationship between the royal family and their protection details by clarifying expectations, establishing clearer protocols, and demonstrating that difficult decisions could be resolved through professional investigation and mutual respect. Mitchell's willingness to take unprecedented action when he believed it was necessary, and the institution's careful consideration of those actions, created a foundation for more effective security operations in the future. The incident also served as a reminder that even the most established institutions must be prepared to adapt and evolve when faced with new challenges. The British monarchy's ability to address the crisis thoughtfully and professionally while maintaining respect for all parties involved demonstrated the resilience and sophistication of an institution that has survived and thrived for centuries by balancing tradition with the practical requirements of changing times. The silence that followed Mitchell's declaration of protective custody seemed to stretch endlessly in the narrow service stairwell. Prince Edward's face displayed a mixture of shock, rage, and disbelief as he processed what had just happened. Never in the modern history of the British monarchy had a protection officer taken such drastic action against a senior member of the royal family. The weight of this unprecedented moment settled heavily on both men as they stood facing each other in the confined space. Prince Edward's initial reaction was one of complete incredulity. "You cannot be serious," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" Mitchell maintained his professional composure, though internally he was acutely aware of the gravity of the situation he had created. Years of training had prepared him for many scenarios, but placing a member of the royal family under protective custody was not covered in any manual. He was operating on instinct, professional judgment, and a deep commitment to his duty as he understood it. "I understand completely, sir," Mitchell replied, his voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of the circumstances. "But my primary responsibility is to protect you and ensure the security of this palace. Your current behavior and disregard for security protocols has created a situation that requires immediate intervention." The sound of footsteps echoing from the main corridor below indicated that their confrontation had not gone unnoticed. Palace staff members were beginning to investigate the unusual sounds coming from the service stairway, and Mitchell knew that within minutes the incident would become known to senior officials throughout the building. Prince Edward seemed to recognize this as well, and his demeanor shifted from outright rage to calculating anger. "Captain Mitchell, I am going to give you one final opportunity to reconsider your actions. Step aside immediately and allow me to continue to my meeting with His Majesty. If you do so now, we can find a way to resolve this situation without destroying your career." The offer was tempting, and Mitchell could see the wisdom in accepting it. Prince Edward was still family to the sovereign, and taking action against him carried enormous professional and personal risks. However, Mitchell's assessment of the prince's mental state and The security implications of allowing him to proceed unchanged remained the same. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I cannot change my position," Mitchell replied. "I believe you represent a security risk in your current state, and I have a duty to prevent potential harm to yourself, the royal family, and this institution." At that moment, the sound of multiple footsteps approached from below, and Mitchell could hear the voices of other protection officers and palace officials beginning to investigate the disturbance. Commander Walsh's voice could be heard directing the response, and Mitchell felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at the arrival of backup. "What exactly is happening here?" Commander Walsh called up the stairwell as she approached their position. "Commander, I have placed Prince Edward under protective custody due to security concerns and violation of established protocols," Mitchell responded, maintaining his position between the prince and the upper stairway. The silence that followed this announcement was profound. Commander Walsh had dealt with numerous security incidents during her career, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She climbed the stairs slowly, her mind racing through the protocols and procedures that might apply to such an unprecedented situation. Prince Edward immediately appealed to the commander's authority. "Commander Walsh, I demand that you order Captain Mitchell to stand down immediately. His actions are completely unauthorized and represent a serious breach of protocol." Commander Walsh positioned herself where she could see both men clearly, her experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. She could see the agitation in Prince Edward's demeanor, the professional determination in Mitchell's stance, and the potential for this incident to escalate into something much more serious. "Captain Mitchell, I need you to explain your actions and your assessment of the current security situation," Walsh said, using her command voice to establish control over the scene. Mitchell provided a concise but thorough explanation of the events that had led to his decision. He described Prince Edward's erratic behavior, the deviation from approved security routes, the prince's disregard for established protocols, and his professional assessment that allowing the situation to continue would create unacceptable security risks. The prince appeared to be operating under extreme stress and was making decisions that compromised both his personal safety and the security of this facility, Mitchell concluded. "Based on my training and experience, I determined that immediate intervention was necessary." Commander Walsh listened carefully to Mitchell's explanation while simultaneously observing Prince Edward's reactions. Her years of experience in royal protection had taught her to read the subtle signs of emotional distress, and she could see evidence supporting Mitchell's assessment of the prince's current state. Prince Edward attempted to interrupt Mitchell's explanation several times, his frustration growing as he realized that the protection officers were taking the incident seriously rather than immediately deferring to his royal status. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Prince Edward protested. "I was simply taking a more direct route to meet with my father. There was nothing threatening or dangerous about my actions. Captain Mitchell has completely overreacted to a routine situation." Commander Walsh raised her hand to indicate that the prince should allow her to complete her assessment before making further statements. The gesture was respectful but firm, demonstrating the delicate balance that protection officers had to maintain between showing proper deference to royalty while still maintaining their professional authority in security matters. After several minutes of careful consideration, Commander Walsh made a decision that would have far-reaching implications for everyone involved. "Prince Edward, I need to ask you to return to your quarters while we conduct a full review of this incident. Captain Mitchell, you will maintain your protective detail but will be relieved of duty pending investigation." The compromise solution satisfied neither party completely, but it provided a framework for managing the immediate crisis while allowing time for senior officials to determine the appropriate response. Prince Edward's return to his quarters would ensure his safety and prevent further security breaches, while Mitchell's temporary relief from duty acknowledged the serious nature of his actions without immediately destroying his career. Prince Edward's response to this decision revealed the depth of his frustration and the pressure he had been under for weeks. "Commander Walsh, I absolutely refuse to be treated like a prisoner in my own family's home. I have urgent business to attend to, and I will not be detained by overzealous security officers who have forgotten their place." "Sir, you are not being detained," Walsh replied carefully. You are being asked to return to your quarters for your own safety and security while we resolve this situation. The alternative would be to involve senior palace officials and potentially create a much larger incident. The mention of involving senior palace officials seemed to give Prince Edward pause. He was already dealing with significant public relations challenges related to his business dealings, and the last thing he needed was additional negative attention from palace insiders. After several moments of internal struggle, his practical instincts began to override his emotional reactions. "How long will this review process take?" Prince Edward asked, his tone suggesting that he was beginning to consider cooperation. "We will work to resolve the situation as quickly as possible," Commander Walsh replied. "However, the timeline will depend on the need to consult with appropriate authorities and ensure that all security concerns have been properly addressed." Mitchell watched this exchange with growing awareness of how his split-second decision in the stairwell had created ripple effects that now involved multiple levels of palace hierarchy. He had acted based on his professional judgment and training, but the consequences of those actions were beginning to extend far beyond what he had anticipated. The group began moving back down the service stairway, with Commander Walsh leading and Mitchell maintaining his protective position near Prince Edward. The prince's cooperation was reluctant, but sufficient to prevent further confrontation, and Mitchell felt some relief that the immediate crisis appeared to be moving toward resolution. However, as they reached the main corridor, it became clear that word of the incident had already begun to spread throughout the palace. Staff members who normally went about their duties with professional discretion were stealing glances at the unusual procession, and Mitchell could see the concern and curiosity in their expressions. The walk back to Prince Edward's quarters took place in tense silence, with each participant lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired and what it might mean for their futures. Mitchell found himself reviewing his actions and wondering if he had made the right choice, while Prince Edward seemed to be calculating the potential damage this incident could cause to his already fragile reputation. When they reached the prince's sitting room, Commander Walsh took charge of establishing the security arrangements that would remain in place during the investigation period. "Sir, you will remain in your quarters with appropriate protection until this matter can be fully reviewed. Captain Phillips will assume responsibility for your security detail during this period." Prince Edward's final words as the protection team prepared to leave revealed both his anger and his understanding of the broader implications of what had occurred. "Commander Walsh, I want you to understand that this incident will not be forgotten. Captain Mitchell's actions today represent a serious breach of the trust and respect that must exist between the royal family and those sworn to protect us." As the door closed behind them, Mitchell realized that his career and reputation now hung in the balance. The decision he had made in the stairwell had been based on his professional assessment of a security threat, but the political and institutional implications of those actions would ultimately be decided by authorities far above his level of responsibility. The investigation that would follow would examine every detail of the incident, analyze the protocols and procedures that governed royal protection, and determine whether Mitchell's actions represented appropriate professional judgment or an unacceptable overreach of authority. The outcome would set important precedents for how protection officers should handle future conflicts between security requirements and royal prerogatives. Commander Walsh's immediate priority was to contain the incident and prevent it from becoming a larger crisis for the palace. As they walked back through the corridors toward the Security Command Center, she began planning the complex process of briefing senior officials, conducting interviews, and managing the potential for media attention if word of the incident leaked beyond the palace walls. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Captain James Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another routine day of royal protection duty. At 34 years old, Mitchell had served the crown for 12 years, rising through the ranks from a basic protection officer to one of the most trusted members of the Royal Protection Squad. His reputation was built on unwavering loyalty, sharp instincts, and an ability to remain calm under pressure that had earned him the respect of both his colleagues and the royal family members he protected. The palace buzzed with unusual activity that Tuesday morning in November. Staff members moved with hurried steps through the corridors, their whispered conversations creating an undercurrent of tension that experienced palace workers like Mitchell could sense immediately. The source of this unease stemmed from a developing crisis that had been brewing for weeks behind the closed doors of the royal apartments. Prince Edward, the Queen's youngest son, had been embroiled in a scandal involving his business dealings with foreign investors. Tabloid newspapers had been running damaging stories for 3 consecutive weeks, each revelation more embarrassing than the last. The stories suggested inappropriate financial relationships, potential conflicts of interest, and raised questions about the prince's judgment in business matters. The palace's communications team had been working overtime to manage the crisis, but their efforts seemed to be failing as new details emerged daily. Mitchell had noticed the growing strain on everyone involved. The Queen herself had appeared more reserved during her recent public appearances, and palace staff moved with the careful precision of people walking on thin ice. As head of the prince's personal protection detail, Mitchell had witnessed firsthand how the mounting pressure was affecting the royal family member he was assigned to protect. That morning, Mitchell received his daily briefing from Commander Sarah Walsh, the head of Royal Protection. The briefing took place in the secure communications room deep within the palace's administrative wing. Commander Walsh's expression was more serious than usual as she outlined the day's security arrangements. "James, we have a situation developing," Commander Walsh began, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience managing royal security challenges. "Prince Edward has requested a private meeting with His Majesty this morning. The meeting wasn't scheduled through normal channels, and we have concerns about the prince's current state of mind." Mitchell listened carefully as Walsh explained that palace insiders had reported erratic behavior from Prince Edward over the past several days. He had been making unusual requests, demanding access to areas of the palace typically reserved for senior royals, and had been observed having heated telephone conversations with unknown parties. The security team had also noted that the prince had been dismissing his usual protection detail at odd hours, choosing to move around the palace grounds without proper security protocols. "Your assignment today is to maintain close protection of Prince Edward throughout his scheduled activities," Walsh continued. "However, we need you to be particularly observant. If the prince attempts to deviate from approved protocols or tries to access areas without proper clearance, you're authorized to intervene using appropriate judgment." The weight of this responsibility settled on Mitchell's shoulders as he made his way to Prince Edward's private quarters. The corridors leading to the royal apartments seemed longer than usual, and the portraits of previous monarchs appeared to watch him with knowing eyes. Mitchell understood that his role today might require him to make decisions that could have far-reaching consequences for both his career and the monarchy itself. Prince Edward's sitting room was decorated with expensive furniture and artwork that reflected his personal taste for modern luxury. When Mitchell entered, he found the prince pacing near the large windows that overlooked the palace gardens. Edward's appearance immediately caught Mitchell's attention. The prince's usually immaculate grooming showed signs of neglect. His hair was disheveled, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Mitchell said, maintaining the formal protocol that governed all interactions between protection officers and members of the royal family. Prince Edward turned sharply at the sound of Mitchell's voice, his movements quick and agitated. "Ah, Captain Mitchell, right on time as always," the prince replied, but his tone carried an edge that Mitchell hadn't heard before. "I trust you're prepared for what promises to be a very eventful day." The prince's demeanor immediately put Mitchell on alert. Years of training and experience had taught him to read the subtle signs of emotional distress, and everything about Prince Edward's behavior suggested a man operating under extreme pressure. The prince's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a cup of tea that sat cooling on an ornate side table, and his eyes had the intense focus of someone who had been thinking too deeply about troubling matters. "I've been briefed on your schedule for today, sir," Mitchell responded professionally. "I understand you have a meeting with His Majesty this morning." Prince Edward's expression darkened at the mention of the planned meeting with his father. "Yes, a meeting that is long overdue," he said, his voice rising slightly. "There are matters that need to be addressed immediately, and I won't be deterred by protocol or palace bureaucracy any longer." The underlying anger in the prince's words confirmed Mitchell's growing concern about the situation. He had worked with enough members of the royal family to recognize when someone was approaching a breaking point, and Prince Edward appeared to be dangerously close to that threshold. As the morning progressed, Mitchell accompanied Prince Edward through his scheduled activities, which included reviewing correspondence and meeting with his private secretary. However, the prince seemed distracted throughout these routine tasks, frequently checking his watch and making comments about the urgent nature of his upcoming conversation with the king. The palace machinery moves too slowly, Prince Edward complained during a break between appointments. While they deliberate and consult their procedures, real damage is being done to the reputation I've spent years building. Sometimes decisive action requires bypassing the normal channels. Mitchell noted the prince's growing agitation and the way he dismissed his private secretary earlier than usual. When the appointed time for the meeting with the king approached, Prince Edward's behavior became even more erratic. He began moving through the palace corridors with quick, determined steps, forcing Mitchell to work harder to maintain proper protective positioning. The route to the king's private study normally followed a predetermined path that allowed for optimal security coverage. However, as they walked through the palace, Prince Edward suddenly deviated from this route without explanation. Instead of taking the main corridor that led directly to the royal apartments, he turned sharply toward a service stairway that was typically used only by staff members. "Sir, this isn't the usual route to His Majesty's study," Mitchell said, quickening his pace to stay close to the prince. "I'm taking a more direct path," Prince Edward replied curtly. "The normal route takes too long, and I have important matters to discuss that can't wait for palace protocol." Mitchell's training kicked in as he evaluated the situation. The service stairway led to areas of the palace where security coverage was limited, and using this route would take them away from the protective surveillance systems that monitored the main corridors. More concerning was the prince's obvious agitation and his apparent disregard for established security procedures. As they climbed the narrow service stairs, Mitchell made a quick decision based on his assessment of the risks involved. "Sir, I need to request that we return to the main corridor. This route hasn't been cleared by security, and it's my responsibility to ensure your safety." Prince Edward stopped abruptly and turned to face Mitchell, his eyes flashing with frustration. "Captain Mitchell, I appreciate your dedication to security, but I am perfectly capable of deciding how to move through my own family's residence. Your job is to protect me, not to dictate my movements." The confrontation that Mitchell had been anticipating all morning was finally beginning to unfold. He could see that Prince Edward was operating under tremendous stress, and that stress was beginning to override the prince's usual respect for security protocols. Mitchell knew that his next words and actions would be crucial in determining how this situation developed. "With respect, sir, my job is to protect you, and that includes protecting you from unnecessary security risks," Mitchell replied, maintaining his professional composure despite the growing tension. Using unauthorized routes through the palace creates vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile parties. "I cannot allow you to proceed without proper security clearance." Prince Edward's face reddened as his frustration reached a boiling point. "Allow me? Captain Mitchell, I believe you've forgotten exactly who you're speaking to. I am a member of the royal family, and you are an employee. You don't give me permission to do anything." The prince pushed past Mitchell and continued up the service stairway, leaving the captain with a difficult decision. He could follow the prince and compromise his security responsibilities, or he could take action to prevent what he believed was a serious security breach. Mitchell's years of training and experience told him that the prince's current state of mind made him a potential risk to himself and others, and that allowing him to proceed without proper supervision would be a dereliction of duty. Mitchell moved quickly to position himself between Prince Edward and the upper level of the stairway. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist that we return to the authorized route. If you wish to file a complaint about my actions, you're certainly free to do so. But right now my priority is ensuring your safety and the security of this palace." The physical confrontation that followed would later become the subject of intense investigation and debate within palace circles. Prince Edward, driven by weeks of mounting pressure and the urgent need to reach his father, attempted to push past Mitchell's blocking position. Mitchell, trained in defensive techniques and committed to his protective responsibilities, stood firm and prevented the prince from advancing further up the stairway. "Move aside immediately," Prince Edward demanded, his voice echoing in the narrow stairwell. "I am ordering you to step aside and allow me to pass." "I cannot do that, sir," Mitchell replied, his voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. "My orders come from the head of royal protection, and those orders require me to prevent unauthorized access to secure areas of the palace. I'm afraid that includes preventing anyone, regardless of their position, from violating established security protocols." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with Prince Edward growing increasingly agitated and Mitchell maintaining his position with professional determination. The sound of their voices in the stairwell began to attract attention from palace staff in nearby areas, and Mitchell knew that the situation was rapidly escalating beyond his ability to manage discreetly. Prince Edward made one final attempt to physically push past Mitchell, but the captain's training and physical conditioning allowed him to maintain his blocking position without using excessive force. At that moment, Mitchell made the decision that would define his career and become a landmark incident in the history of royal protection protocols. "Sir, I am placing you under protective custody for your own safety and the security of this palace," Mitchell announced, using a protocol that had never been employed against a member of the royal family in living memory. "You will need to return to your quarters immediately while this situation is evaluated by senior security officials." The implications of this action would reverberate through the palace hierarchy and ultimately reach the highest levels of the monarchy, setting in motion a chain of events that would test the very foundations of royal protocol and security procedures.